Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about some verses of Guru Vācaka Kōvai. I was initially planning to talk about maybe 3 or 4 verses, and I'd selected 2, and I was thinking of the other ones to choose when someone sent me 3 verses that he wanted me to talk about. So I'll first talk about the 2 verses that I decided upon, and then I'll talk about the other 3 verses. The first verse I want to talk about is verse 579. This is a very beautiful verse in Tamil. The essence of the essential message of a verse is in the last 2 lines, which actually could form a separate verse on their own. So I'll start with the last 2 lines, and then I'll go on to the second 2 lines. The last 2 lines are Upayamum tane, upayamum tane, abedama kanga ave. What that means is upaya is means the aim or the goal, and upaya means the means or the path to reach that goal. So what Bhagavan says there is upayamum tane. The goal is only oneself, and the path is only oneself. In other words, the goal and the path are one. And then he concludes it in the last line by saying, Abedama kanga ave. Abedama means to be non-different, or not separate, and not different. Kanga means see, and ave means them. So see them or know them to be non-different. So our aim, our goal is only ourself. And the means is to reach that goal is only ourself, is what Bhagavan is saying here. Then in the first 2 lines, the last word of the second line, tunnum, means to be reached. So or which is to be reached. So that is an adjective to upayam. So upayam means the aim or the goal, which is to be reached. And then the rest of the first 2 lines are giving 2 reasons why this is so. The first reason is Mandu Sarupa Advaita Marchial. Sarupa means our own real nature, what we actually are. And Manu means what is enduring, what is permanent. So our own enduring, it implies in this context ever existing, eternal Swarupa. Swarupa, what we actually are. Advaita Marchial. Advaita means Advaita, non-dual. In other words, one only without a second. And Marchi means glory, greatness, or clarity. So because of it, the glory of being non-dual. In other words, because our Swarupa has that glory of being non-dual. Or it also, as I say, it also means clarity. So it's something that is shining very, very clearly. One thing we are always clearly aware of is our own being, I am. That is Swarupa. So because of that great clarity, so as I say, this first clause means because of the Advaita Machi of the enduring Swarupa. In other words, because of the greatness or glory of being non-dual, of our Swarupa. That's the first reason. And the second reason he gives is Verugati Tanne Tavitu Illa Tanmayal. That means because of Tanme can mean nature. It can also mean first person, but that's not what it means here. It can mean nature. Here it means the fact, because of the fact of that Tanne tavitu, other than oneself, vera gati illa. There's no other gati. Gati has several meanings. Gati can mean a refuge. It can also mean a means. It can also mean goal. So gati contains within itself both the upaya and the upaya. There's no refuge for us other than ourselves. That is because what we actually are is that Manu Swarupa, that ever-existing Swarupa, which is one only without a second. There's no other refuge, no other permanent refuge. Whatever else we may take refuge in will pass. So it's not a reliable refuge. The only refuge that is uh, enduring, that is ever existing, is our own real nature. So the whole verse means because of the Advaita glory of the enduring Swarupa, and because of the fact that excluding oneself, there is no other gati, the aim to be reached is only oneself, and the means is only oneself. Know them to be non-different. An explanatory paraphrase of that would be, because of the Advaita Marchi, the glory, greatness, or clarity of being non-dual, one only without a second, of the enduring Swarupa, one's own real nature, which always shines clearly as I am, and because of the fact that, excluding oneself, there is no other gati, refuge, means, or goal, the upaya means aim or goal to be reached is only oneself, and the upaya, the means or path to reach it, is only oneself. Know them to be non-different. Know them to, that is, know the goal and the path to be non-different. That is, since our goal is that which alone is permanent, that which alone is that which ultimately is one only without a second, there cannot be any means to attain it other than ourself. So when Bhagavan says that the goal is ourself and the means is ourself, what exactly does he mean by that? That is, ourself is not, as Bhagavan often said, our, ourself or jnana, the knowledge of ourself, is not something new to be attained. We always are ourself and we always know ourself. So in what sense is it a goal to be attained? It's a goal because we now though we always know ourselves, we now know ourselves as something other than what we actually are. So we now mistake ourselves to be this body consisting of five sheaths, or this person that we mistake ourselves to be. This is what we now experience as ourselves. But this is not what we actually are. So since this awareness, I am this body, is a false awareness, it's an erroneous awareness, it can be removed only by correct awareness, by only by being aware of ourselves as we actually are, can we remove this false awareness. If we see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, the way to remove that mistaken perception that it's a snake is to clearly see that it's just a rope. So to remove this false awareness, I am this body, we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. So the goal is to know ourselves as we actually are. But ourself is not something, we cannot know ourselves in the same way that we know other things. To know anything other than ourselves is an action. It's a mental activity to know anything other than ourselves. But to know ourselves, no mental activity is necessary because what we actually are is awareness. So we know ourselves just by being ourselves. So as Bhagavan said in verse 26 of Upadeshundiya, Tanai iritale, tanai aridalam. Um, um, Being oneself alone is knowing oneself. Tanya rendatradal undipara, because oneself is not two. We are not, it's not one self to know another self. So we can know ourselves only by being ourselves. To know anything other than ourselves is a mental activity, whereas to know ourselves is just to be ourselves. But we are always ourselves. So what does it mean to be ourselves? As Bhagavan makes clear in verse 27 of Upadesha, of Ulladu Napadu, he says, Nanu diada ullanilai, namaduvai ullanilai. Nan udiada ullanilai literally means the I not rising being state. That is the state in which I is without rising. So in the state of just being as we are without rising as ego, that is nam aduvai ulanile, the state in which we are that. That referring to what we actually are, Swarupa or Brahman. So to be what we actually are, we need to cease rising as ego. So how to cease rising as ego? He explains in the next sentence of that verse. He says, I'll just get the verse, just to get it. This verse 27 of Uludunapadu is one of the very, I mean, all the verses of Uludunapadu are important in their own way, but this verse 27 really captures the essence of Bhagavan's teachings. So what he says is, Nanu diada ullanilai, namaduvai ullanilai. The state in which I is without rising is the state in which we are as that. And then he goes on to say, the next sentence is a rhetorical question. He asks, Nanudikum tanamade nadamo, nanudia tanirape savadu evan. That means, without investigating the place where I rises, how to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise. So tanirape, the annihilation of oneself, that means the annihilation of ego. So the state in which I does not rise, permanently does not rise, is the state in which ego is annihilated. So how to reach that state without investigating the place where I rises? So what does he mean by investigating the place where I rises? He's using the word place here, obviously in a metaphorical sense. The place where I rises is the source from which I rises. The source from which the rising I is ego. So the place from which ego rises is from our being. So the rising I rises from the being I. That is, we can understand this from our own experience. In sleep, ego does not exist. What exists in sleep is only our own being, only Sat-Chit, our being awareness. So what exists and shines in sleep is only the being awareness, Sat-Chit, I am. From that rises ego in waking and in dream. So that I that shines alone in sleep, that is our being. So that's the being I, and ego is the rising I. So ego rises from our being. So when he says without investigating the place where I rises, he means without investigating our being, without investigating what we essentially are. How can we reach the annihilation of ourself in which I does not rise? That is because ego is a false awareness of ourself, an awareness of ourself as I am this body. It can be annihilated only by correct awareness of ourself. So to gain that correct awareness of ourself, we need to attend to ourself. We need to investigate ourself, look very closely at ourself. In order to get rid of the illusory snake, we have to look very carefully at it. If we look very carefully at it, we see, oh, it's not a snake, it's just a rope. And that way, the illusion, the erroneous perception of it as a snake is removed. In the same way, the erroneous perception of ourself as this person that we mistake ourselves to be, or any other person. But now we mistake ourselves to be this person. In previous dreams, that in previous lives, we mistook ourselves to be some other person. And if we continue dreaming, we'll be dreaming one dream after another. Each dream will be a new person. That is each life. So to remove this false awareness, I am this person, that I am this body, we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. And to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, we need to investigate ourselves. So what we actually are, that is the place from which we've risen as ego. So that is what we need to investigate. And that is what is ever shining in us as our own being, I am. So it's not something unknown that we have to seek. We just need to know clearly what we always know, which is I am. And then he concludes the verse by saying, Saramal, without reaching. That implies without reaching the annihilation of oneself, how to stand in this Tanaduam Tanilayo Nipadu Evan. How to stand in one's own state, in which one is that. Satru saying. So, and our goal is to know and to be what we actually are. And the means to reach that goal, as he says in this verse of Guru Vācaka Kōvai, that is, our goal is to know and to be ourselves, and the means to that goal is to know and to be ourselves. So to know ourselves, we need to attend to ourselves. When we attend to another very, very important thing in Bhagavan's teaching, one thing Bhagavan has made clear in a way that it hasn't been made so clear in any of the ancient texts, is the nature of ego. As he says in verse 25 of Uludunapadu, ego comes into existence grasping form. It stands grasping form. Grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Leaving form, it grasps form. So the very nature of ego is to grasp form. Since ego is, he describes ego in that verse as Uruvatrapaya Hande, the formless demon ego. It's formless because it's got no form of its own. Since it has no form of its own, it's got no separate existence of its own. It acquires a seemingly separate existence by grasping the form of a body as I. So without grasping the form of the body as I, ego cannot rise. Without continuing to grasp the form of a body as I, ego cannot stand or endure. So grasping form, it comes into being. Grasping form, it stands. And having grasped the form of a body as I, it's constantly grasping other forms. How does it grasp other forms? By constantly attending to them. That is, ego is essentially just awareness. So it's grasping in its awareness all these phenomena. That is the food on which it lives. That is what nourishes it. So the very nature of ego is to grasp form. And so long as that means to attend to things other than itself. So long as we're attending to things other than ourselves, we're thereby nourishing and feeding this ego. But if we investigate what this ego is, no such thing as ego will be found. As he says in the next sentence, Tedinal ottum pidicum. If sought, it takes flight. That is, we seem to be ego so long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves. But if we attend to ourselves, this ego subsides and disappears. That is, in other words, we seem to be ego so long as we're attending to other things. But if we attend to ourselves, there's no such thing as ego to be found. So the nature of ego is to subside to the extent to which we attend to it. So the more we attend to ourselves, more keenly we attend to ourselves, the more we as ego subside. So this again makes clear what he means by oneself alone is the means, upayamumtane. That is, it's only by attending to ourselves that we as ego can subside in such a way that we never rise again. So the more keenly we attend to ourselves, the more we subside. And the more we subside, where do we subside? We subside back into our being. So by attending to ourself, we are thereby being ourself. So just as Bhagavan said in verse 26 of Upadesha, Tanai Tanai Iritle, Tanai Aridalam. Being oneself alone is knowing oneself. Knowing oneself is being oneself. It works both ways, obviously. And so when we are in the practice of self-investigation, we are turning our attention back to ourselves to know ourselves. The more clearly we attend to ourselves, that is to our essential being, to that fundamental awareness I am, the more we thereby subside and remain as we actually are. So knowing and being ourselves is our aim, and knowing and being ourselves is the means to that aim. So Abhedama Kanga Abe, see that they are non-different, know them to be non-different. So in this verse of Guru Vācaka Kōvai, that is, when we read these verses, the verses of Guru Vācaka Kōvai are very, very deep in meaning, and they're all connected with Bhagavan's own original verses. That is, connected in meaning, because Bhagavan's teachings are very, very simple and they're very coherent. They're all tied together. That is, when I say Bhagavan teaching, I'm talking about his essential teachings, his fundamental teachings. Of course, Bhagavan taught so many things to so many people according to the questions they asked and according to their particular needs. But his essential teachings are contained in works such as Nana, Uludunapadu, Upadeshundia, Amma-vichara, Arunachashtakam, that we've been talking about recently, other verses of Arunachastutpanchakam, and also in Guru Vācaka Kōvai. So many of the things that we can infer from Bhagavan's original verses are made very explicit in Guru Vācaka Kōvai. So we should read these verses of Guru Vācaka Kōvai in the light of Bhagavan's original verses, because then they all tie together very, very nicely, and then we get the full meaning out of them. The other verse I wanted to talk about today was 647. This is also a very beautiful verse. The first line, Adonai no kade, idane no kade. No kade, normally no kade, it would be a negative imperative. So Adonai no kade means do not look at that. Idane no kade, do not look at this. So that's how the first line can be interpreted. But it's not, it's actually, this first line is connected with the next line, in which he says, Edane ni no kadu irupin. If you are just being without looking at anything. So we can take the first line, that no kade, though it can be taken as a negative imperative, it can also be taken as an intensified adverbial participle. So taking it in that sense, then it makes the whole verse one sentence. So that is, I think, the intended meaning. So Adonai no kade, Idane no kade, Edane ni no kadu irapin means if you are being, that implies if you are just being, without looking at that, without looking at this, without looking at anything, then he goes on to say, Madanse irupu no kale. That means just by the powerful look at being. Irupu no kale means by looking at being. And Madanse means that is by attending to our being. It's such a powerful look. That is because the source of all power, the power by which we've created all of this entire universe, is that power of our own being. So when we turn our attention back to our own being, we thereby draw on the power of our own being. So Bhagavan describes that look at our being, that self-attentiveness, as Madam Ser. Madam Ser means Madam means what is means power. Ser means joined. So Madam Ser can apply to our being, which is very powerful. It can also apply to the attention to our being, looking at our being. So just by looking at just by that powerful look at our being, Elleila Chidakasa Parapunoku Am Podola Vai. You will be or you will become Porol. Porol means the real substance, what actually exists. And what is that real substance? Elleila Chidakasa That is, it is the limitless space of awareness. Chidakasa means chit means pure awareness. So that limitless, that infinite space of pure awareness, that is Poro. And how do we become that? Parapu noku. That is parapu means uh, expanding or having expanded. So by looking at our being, our vision, our view becomes expanded. How does it become expanded? It's not stated here, but what we have to understand is we expand that infinite space of pure awareness just by shedding all our limiting adjuncts. That is, that Chidakasa is what we always actually are. But why we seem to be something other than that infinite space of awareness is because we've now limited ourselves by identifying ourselves with a set of limiting adjuncts or upadis. So by shedding these limiting adjuncts, we thereby expand, not literally expand, but in effect we expand and become that infinite Chidakasa. That is this finite ego. This ego seems to be finite because of its identification with the limiting adjuncts, the upadis. But when we know ourselves as we actually are, we thereby shed the upadis and we, metaphorically speaking, expand as that. In other words, we remain as that infinite space of awareness, which is what we always actually are. So the meaning of the whole verse is, if you are just being without looking at that, without looking at this, without looking at anything, just by the powerful look of being, you will be the real substance, which is the limitless space of awareness, the look having expanded. That's the essential meaning. If we slightly expand it, it becomes, if you are just being without looking at that, without looking at this, without looking at anything at all other than yourself, just by that powerful look at your own being, you will be Porol, the one real substance, which is the limitless space of awareness, Chittakasa, your look having expanded as such by shedding all its limiting adjuncts, upadis. I would just take an opportunity here to reply to someone a few days ago sent me an email, which I haven't actually had time to reply to. I'll just refer to that email now. Wait a second, what did he? Because it indirectly is connected with that. Oh yes, someone wrote to me about Gurdjieff, asking whether Gurdjieff's self-remembering is the same as Ramana's remaining in the self. Well, but remaining in the self means being as we are. That's what Bhagavan taught. Gurdjieff taught something that he calls self-remembrance. And people sometimes think, oh, self-remembrance, that sounds just like Bhagavan's teaching, but actually it's very different. What Gurdjieff's taught is that you have to divide your attention. You have to attend to whatever is happening, and at the same time you have to be aware of yourself as one who is aware of what is happening. But Bhagavan's teaching is different. Bhagavan says, do not look at this, do not look at that, do not look at anything other than yourself. Just attend only to your own being. In other words, we need to withdraw our attention from all other things and attend only to our own being. The more we attend to our being, the more we thereby subside and merge back into our being. So, as he says in this verse, by that powerful look at our own being, we thereby shed all our upadhis and expand as that infinite space of pure awareness that we actually are. So we need to, and that's why in the sixth paragraph of Nana, Bhagavan said, uh, what, what's it matter however many thoughts arise? As and when each thought arises, it's necessary to investigate to whom does it rise. And he goes on in the same theme. From that, what we have to understand is Bhagavan's path is not attending to anything other than ourselves, attending only to ourselves. He even says, however many other thoughts arise, so what? Bhagavan isn't concerned about thoughts. The problem is not the thoughts. The problem is our attending to the thoughts. So the problem is not this Maya, this world or anything. It's the fact that we have so much liking to attend to it. What we need to do is to turn our entire attention back to ourselves. By attending to ourselves, we thereby withdraw our attention from everything else. As he says in verse 16 of Upadeshundya, uh, um, Vele videngale victu. That literally means leaving external phenomena. That implies ceasing to attend to external phenomena. Manam tanoli uru ordale. The mind knowing its own form of light. Its own form of light means its essential awareness I am. So the mind knowing its own form of light, that alone is real awareness. So being aware of things other than ourself is not real awareness. Being aware of ourself alone, that is real awareness. So we need to give up all attention to things other than ourselves. In the Sanskrit version of that verse 16, he says, Drisya varitum. Drisya means what is seen, anything other than ourselves. Varitum, I think, means warded off or kept aside. So setting aside all awareness of other things, chittum atmanaha chitva darshanam. Chittam means the mind in that context. Atmanaha is the genitive form of Atman, so it means, in this context, it means its own. The mind knowing its own chitva. The chitva is its nature as consciousness or awareness. Darshanam means seeing or knowing. So chittam atmanaha chitva darshanam tattva darshanam. That is seeing tattva. Tattva means what is real, what actually exists. So in Bhagavan's path, we need to cease attending to anything other than ourselves. We need to just keep our attention fixed on our own being. And that in the first clause ends with the word irupin. Irupin means if being, but he also adds ni there, so he makes it clear he's addressing us. If you are just being, so we need to be as we actually are. How to be as we actually are? As I explained earlier, as Bhagavan says in verse 27 of Uludunapadu, the means to be without rising as I is only to investigate the place from which I rises. The place from which I rises is our own being. So what we need to attend to is just to our own being. Let anything else happen. Let any thoughts come and go. Let any perceptions come and go. We shouldn't be concerned about them, because if we're concerned about thoughts, if we're concerned about perceptions, if we're concerned about all these so many things that appear in the mind, our attention is on those things. We need to be unconcerned about anything other than attending to our own being. The more we attend to our own being, the more our attention is thereby automatically withdrawn from everything else. So Bhagavan's path is just being self-attentive, attending only to our own being. And we don't even have to try to stop thinking or try to stop attending to other things. If we simply try to attend to ourselves, the more we attend to ourselves, the more our attention is withdrawn from all other things. Because when attention is very focused, it can be focused only on one thing. So if we make ourself alone as our dhyana lakshya, the target of our attention, the target of our meditation. We are not to meditate on anything other than ourself, our own being, our fundamental awareness, I am. So that is what Bhagavan implies in this verse, and also in the other verse when he says that the means is only oneself. That implies attending to ourself and thereby being ourself. That alone is the means, that alone is the goal. So I had selected these two verses, and I thought of selecting maybe one or two other verses on the same theme. But then a friend wrote to me asking me to talk about three particular verses in Guru Vācaka Kōvai. That's verses 586, 588, and 589. What this friend who wrote to me, he pointed out that in the translation of Guru Vācaka Kōvai by T.V. Venkata Subramaniam, the one that was edited by David Gottman, they had interpreted certain words in these three verses differently to the way in which they were interpreted in the translation by Sadhu Om and me. And so this friend asked me to comment on these different interpretations. And what my friend wrote was, the way these three verses are translated by Venkata Subramaniam, it may seem as though Bhagavan had utter contempt for the female genitals. If female genitals are despicable, then what makes the male organs any special? They are equally despicable. Do the original Tamil verses themselves convey what is translated by Venkata Subramaniam, or do they mean something else? Women seekers devoted to Bhagavan can feel offended by the way their private parts are described. But the way Sadhu Om and yourself have translated these very verses seems to be very moderate and not offending to women seekers. And it seems to address equally to men seekers as well as women seekers. It's Bhagavan's warning to both the categories regarding the dangers posed by lust. What do you have to say about this? So that's what my friend asked me. So I will start by talking about the last of these three verses. That's verse 589, because this is, but there is a slight difference in the way it's been interpreted, but it's not a very controversial difference, and actually both are correct in this case. That is, for those aspirants who have great and intense eagerness to enjoy the ripe fruit of unlimited supreme bliss, the sense pleasures, which are worthy to be liked and enjoyed only by blind people, within bracket, people blinded by ignorance, who do not know how to save themselves from ruin, are the lowest and fit only for rejection. So that's a translation by Sadhu Om and me. How Venkata Subramaniam translated it is, for much desired but trivial pleasure of sex is worthy of being sought only by those defenseless people who have lost the eye of discrimination. To those who have intensively developed the lofty longing to consume the luscious fruit of supreme bliss that is not circumscribed by thought, this trivial pleasure is most inferior. The main difference between these two interpretations is the way the term chitrimbam has been interpreted. Sadhu Om and I translated it as sense pleasures. Venkata Subramaniam translated it as trivial pleasure of sex. Both interpretations are equally valid, because Chitrimbam, according to the Tamil lexicon, they give three meanings for Chitrimbam, or two meanings actually: earthly pleasures, imekuria sukham, that is any worldly pleasures implies, or sensual pleasures, carnal pleasure, karma bimbam. Chitrimbam, imbam is a word that means happiness, joy, pleasure. It applies to any form of happiness. Chitru is a form of siru. Siru is an adjective from the word sirume. Sirume means smallness, littleness, insignificance, or youth, or fineness, minuteness, diminution, dwindling. These are all meanings given in the Tamil lexicon. Want, poverty, indigence, scarcity, famine, sorrow, suffering, misery, offense, disgrace, fault, defect, disease, lust, baseness. So Chitrimba means any petty pleasure. Chitrimbam is one of a pair of contrasting terms. The other being perimbam, which is what Bhagavan in the first half of the verse, he uses the term perimbam, the supreme happiness. So chitrimbam is any happiness, joy, or pleasure that is not perimbam. Perimbam means paranandam, or supreme bliss, or moksha bimbam, that is heavenly bliss or salvation. These meanings given in the Tamil lexicon. That is, Peru means what is large or what is great. So perimbam is the supreme happiness, the real happiness, the happiness of liberation, the happiness that is our real nature. And chitrimbam is any other type of happiness or joy or pleasure. So chitrimbam, that's why in Sadhu Om's translation, it was translated as sense pleasures, because it certainly includes sexual pleasure, but it's a broader term than just sexual pleasure, all types of sense pleasure. In fact, we can take it any type of bodily pleasure, whether it's the pleasure of eating good food, or I mean, people take pleasure in food, they take pleasure in smoking, they take pleasure in drinking, they take pleasure in so many things, including taking pleasure in carnal activity, in sexual activity. But these are all included in chitrimbam. So any type of worldly or bodily pleasure, even a pleasure like an intellectual pleasure, is also a chitrimbam. It's also a small body bound. That is only when we identify the body as I, but we become aware of things, and we therefore take pleasure in intellectual pursuits or in sports or in so many things. So all are included in chitrimbam. But it's certainly not wrong. I mean, chitrimbam is often used referring specifically to sexual pleasure. So when Venkata Subramaniam translated it as trivial pleasure of sex, that is certainly not wrong. So it's not really a very significant difference between the way he's interpreted it and the way Sadhu Om and I interpreted it. It's all essentially the same. Another slight difference between the way he interpreted it and the way he interpreted it and the way Sadhu Om interpreted it, there's a phrase kan iranda mara makale. Venkata Subramanian translated it as those defenseless people who have lost the eye. And he explains lost the eye of discrimination. Whereas Sadhu Om translated it as blind people, which he explains as people blinded by ignorance, who do not know how to save themselves from ruin. Kannirenda does literally mean who have lost eye, but it implies who are blind. And Amara, sorry, I'm not pronouncing my Amara means Venkata translated as unprotected. It does mean that. It means unprotected, unsaved, but it implies who do not know how to save themselves from ruin. That is the this verb emaru is etymologically linked to the Sanskrit word kshema. Kshema means what is kshema in the sense of safety. So emaru means to be safe. Emara means unsafe. So the implication is that if we seek pleasure in anything other than ourselves, there's no safety in that. That is all worldly pleasures. They're very undependable, and they all eventually lead to ruin. That is, however much we acquire this chitrimbam, these small petty pleasures of the world, we're going to lose them all. Even if we acquire great wealth, we're going to have to say goodbye to it when we die. Whatever type of pleasure we try to extract from this body and world is going to disappoint us in the end, because we're going to have to say goodbye to it all. So ultimately, there's no real safety to be found in seeking the petty happiness, the petty pleasures that we seek. Real safety lies only in Perimbam, the supreme bliss of liberation, because that alone is permanent. That alone is our own real nature. So it's what will remain with us forever. So these words, simple words that we're going to use it, they have very, very deep implication. So it's not wrong to translate it as unprotected, but that doesn't really convey fully the sense of the implication of the term, which is why Sadhu Om expanded it by saying, who do not know how to save themselves from ruin. That is, if we are seeking happiness in things other than ourselves, we are heading for our own ruin, our own downfall. So if we want to save ourselves from that downfall, we need to seek only that supreme bliss. That's why Bhagavan says in this verse, for those who have great and intense eagerness to enjoy the ripe fruit of unlimited supreme bliss, the sense pleasures, which are worthy to be liked and enjoyed only by blind people who do not know how to save themselves from ruin, are the lowest and fit only for rejection. So, as I say, there's not a huge amount of difference between the way Venkata Subramaniam interpreted that and the way Sadhu Om and I interpreted it. However, the other two verses, there is a difference, quite a significant difference. And I think this is the one my friend was most concerned about. In verse 586, the way Sadhu Om and I, the way it was translated by Sadhu Om and me, was those interested in arguments, within bracket, the mere scholars of scriptures, who have not experienced the happiness of consciousness, the bliss of self, who value only the pleasures which are other than self, derived from objects such as women, and who are confused, will finally perish longing for them, the sense pleasures, even at the time of death. That was our interpretation. And Venkata Subramaniam's interpretation was, those ignorant people who have not experienced the bliss of consciousness will esteem the other pleasures, said to begin with the pleasure of the despicable female sexual organ, will be tossed about by them. Even at the moment of their death, they will pine away, lusting after them, and perish. The term that Venkateswaramaniam has translated as the pleasure of the despicable female sexual organ is pun matar kuri imbam. The imbam means happiness or pleasure. So there's there's no controversy about that. But the way he's interpreted pun mata kuri, that's what he takes as despicable female sexual organ. I think that is not the correct interpretation. Firstly, pun is an adjective that means mean, low, vile, unclean, petty, or, and so on. That I think that it is appropriate in this context to take that as an adjective to the happiness, not either to females or to the female sexual organ. That is not what is meant there. That is, it's a petty. It's the that pun is a description of the pleasures are petty pleasure. They're mean, low, petty pleasures. Regarding the term matar, it has several meanings. It can mean a woman, it can mean beauty, it can mean gold, and it can mean love. Love, the word they give for love is kadal. Kadal can mean either the supreme love or it can mean worldly love. It can mean so it's got several possible interpretations. But the word that that he had taken as referring to the sexual organ is the word kuri. Kuri is a word that means a mark or a sign. It's got a whole range of meanings. One among its many meanings is the generative, as they put it in the Tamil lexicon, the generative organ. In other words, the sexual organ. They talk of arm kuri, which is the male sexual organ, or pen kuri, the female sexual organ. So kuri can mean, one of the many meanings of kuri as a noun is a sexual organ. But kuri is also a verb. And as a verb, it means referring to, pertaining to, or related to. So the mata kuri imbam, rather than taking it as the pleasure of the female sexual organ, which is, would Bhagavan really go down into that sort of detail? I don't think so. I think it simply means the pleasure pertaining to women. In other words, it's referring to sexual pleasure. It's not referring to any particular physical organ. And as I say, the word pun is referring to the pleasure, not to the not either to the females or to their organs. So I think it just the interpretation given by, I agree with my friend, but the interpretation given by Venkateswaramaniam doesn't seem to me to be correct. I don't think Bhagavan would talk about that is the problem with the real problem with why do we derive pleasure from sexual activity? It's because we have desire for that. That pleasure is derived from the gratification of our desire. And what is the problem lies in the desire, not in the physical act itself. The physical act, after all, is how how we reproduce, how we as a species reproduce. So children are, we're all born, that is, as this physical body, we are born as a result of sexual activity. So the activity itself is not um, is not wrong. What the wrong lies, or why it's an impediment in the spiritual path, is that because of our identification with this body, we all tend to have very strong sexual desire. And that's why we derive that is that sexual desire is almost, we can say, hardwired into this body, because the body is a biological organism. It has to reproduce. And so when we identify this body as I, we thereby take on this desire. This desire becomes something very deeply embedded in us because of our identification with the body. And because it's a bodily function, the desire for that binds us to this body. So that's why it's an impediment in the spiritual path. It's not the sexual act itself is an impediment. It is the desire for that which is the impediment. So when Bhagavan used the word pun, he's describing the pleasure. It's a petty pleasure. It's a mean pleasure. It can also mean, um, well, yeah, it can also, pun can also mean despicable. But as I say, it's the pleasure that Bhagavan is calling despicable. He's not referring to the female organ as despicable. If the female organ is despicable, then the whole body is despicable. But I mean, we all, whether we identify a male body or a female body as this body is made of flesh and all these things. It's from a perspective of our real nature. This is something, identifying with this body is very despicable. Of course, the body is just some material thing. It's neither good nor bad. It's our identification with it that is the problem. So I feel I feel the interpretation given by that is pun matter kuri imbam, we can equally well take it to mean the petty pleasure pertaining to women. And since matter doesn't just mean women, it can also mean beauty, it can also mean gold, it can also mean love. It can refer to any type of, I mean, if we take it gold, desire for money is also referred to there. I mean, it also can be taken as implying the petty pleasure derived or pertaining to wealth. That is, so many people in this world ruthlessly try to acquire wealth at the expense of others. This is a petty pleasure. This is a petty, despicable pleasure. If you amass huge amount of wealth, you do so at the expense of others. Because if one person has a huge amount of wealth, will be others who are deprived of that wealth. So these words can be interpreted in a number of different ways. But if we take it in the sense of love, and we take love here, I mean, cardinal is a word that can be referred to divine love. It can also refer to human love, to physical love. So if we take it in the sense of physical love, as my friend says, what Bhagavan says here is referring not just is applicable not just to men but to women. Anyone who seeks pleasure in bodily, who seeks pleasure in bodily gratification is referred to in this verse. Another thing here is about the words Bhagavan uses or Murugan uses, but it's based on what Bhagavan said, is pun mata kuri imbam, the petty pleasure pertaining to women or to love. RDI quorum, that means which is piridu imbam. So the main noun is piridu imbam. So piridu imbam, I'll discuss about meaning of that afterwards, which is said to begin with the pleasure pertaining, the petty pleasure pertaining to carnal pleasure, we can take it, pertaining to women or pertaining to love. Piridu imbam, Venkateswaramaniam took it as other pleasure. That's a perfectly legitimate interpretation, but it actually has a deeper meaning to that. Piridu means what is separate, what is other. So Sadhu Om took it to mean pleasure from what is other, pleasure from anything other than ourselves. That is, if we are seeking pleasure in anything other than ourselves, whether we are seeking pleasure in sexual gratification, in other satisfying other sensual desires, or satisfying desire for wealth or whatever it may be, these are all covered here. And they're all pleasures of things. We're seeking pleasure from things other than ourselves. That is what Bhagavan is talking about here. And one of those pleasures that we derive from things other than ourselves is this sexual pleasure, this pleasure, this petty pleasure pertaining to, from a point of view of a man, we can take matter to mean women, or from a point of view of a woman, love. I mean, we can take it, it's got a broad range of meanings, but there's nothing in the verse that means that we have to interpret the mata kuri as the female generative organ. And even if we interpret it like that, the pun still doesn't refer, the pun refers to the pettiness is in the pleasure, not in the, it doesn't mean despicable female organ. So I think my friend is correct in saying this doesn't seem to be an appropriate interpretation of this verse. And then the next verse, 588, that was 586, 588, the way Sadhu Om and I interpreted it was mean-minded people dip only into the pit, the filthy spring of sex, and become objects of ridicule for wise persons and struggle in their life. They will never reject it, their low life, and enjoy higher life by immersing in the supreme bliss of Shiva. And Venkateswaramaniam translated as, those worthless people with minds lacking in purity will approach the pit from which fleshy secretions discharge, and, lying trapped in it, will become objects of contempt. They will not leave it and eagerly revel in the ocean of bliss that is the supreme Shivam. But then they, after their translation, there's a note which is added either by Venkateswaramaniam or by David Godman or both. The pit referred to is the female genitals. There is no reason why we have to take this word. The word is kuri. It means a pit. There's no reason why we should take that to mean the female genitals. The verse doesn't, I mean, we can stretch it and interpret it in that way, but it doesn't seem to be an appropriate interpretation. The term that is used in the verse is korupu near utru kuriye. Korupu has several meanings according to lexicon. It means fullness, richness. It means fat, grease, lard. It means plumpness, corpulency, fleshiness. It means thickness and consistency, as sandal paste. It means sauciness or impudence. And it means a state of soil being too rich to be productive. So it's got a range of meanings. The next word is near. Near means water, or it can also refer to humors of the body, such as serum and lymph. Utru means flowing, gushing forth as blood from one artery or milk from the other. The pouring of rat from a musked elephant. Or it can also mean a spring or fountain, near Utru, and moisture oozing from the ground. But the order of words is Korupu near Utru Kurie. Near Utru means a spring or fountain. That is, near means water, and Utru means that from which it arises. So near Utru also means a spring. And Kuri means a pit, hole, hollow, cavity, dimple, depression, excavation, a tank or a pond, a well, the stomach, the cavity at the bottom of a well, or a garden bed, irrigated or irrigated portion of a garden. So it's got a range of meanings. It seems to me that the word pit here is used in a metaphorical way. It's a metaphorical description of bodily pleasures. And I don't see any justification for interpreting it, but saying that it refers to female genitals. There's nothing in the verse that suggests that. That is Korupu near Utru, the way they've taken it as, let me see, in their translation they put, the pit from which fleshy secretions discharge. I mean, if we can take it in that sense, but it doesn't seem very appropriate. Kuri seems to me a pit. We talk about, I mean, it's used in a metaphorical sense, the pit of worldly pleasures. It's not talking about any particular part of a female anatomy. I don't see any justification for taking it in that sense. Korupu ni utru kuri literally means the fleshy oozing pit, or the pit that is a spring of 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 of, of fleshiness. If we want to take it in a literal sense, rather than referring to a particular part of the female body, we can take it as referring to the entire body, not the entire female body, male body or female body. This Bhagavan is referring to this body as a fleshy, fluid oozing pit, and we wallow in this fleshy fleshy fluid oozing pit called body when we mistake it to be ourself. So rather than taking it as referring to a particular part of the female anatomy, take it as the whole body, male or female, doesn't matter. Its body is it's fleshy, it oozes fluids of various kind, and it's a pit, not in a literal sense, but in a metaphorical sense. It's a pit in which we wallow. When we mistake this body to be ourself, we seek happiness through this body. That is not only sexual pleasure, but all other type of sensual pleasures. They're mediated by this body. It's because we identify this body as I, but we take pleasure in sexual activity, that we take pleasure in eating, that we take pleasure in all types of sense pleasures, whether it's the pleasures of fine art or even intellectual pleasures. It's only when we identify this body as I, but we take pleasure in intellect. So any type of chitrimbam, as in fact Sadhu Om in his Tamil interpretation of this verse, he refers to it. I'll see if I've got what Sadhu Om put for this in his Tamil verse. A second. This is 5, because he uses the word chitrimbam, I know. 588. He took it as this Korupune Utru, the pit. He refers to it as chitrimbam, the pit of chitrimbam, as I explained earlier, is the opposite of or is anything that is not perimbam. Perimbam is the supreme happiness of liberation. All types of worldly pleasures, bodily pleasures, all come under any pleasure other than perimbam is chitrimbam. So, and that chitrimbam it's a pit in which we are wallowing. So I agree with my friend, but I think referring to the female genitals, I don't think Bhagavan would have referred to the female genitals in this way, and I don't think that's what either Bhagavan or Murugan intended in these two verses. I don't think there's any intention to refer to female genital organs specifically. It's just they're talking about seeking pleasure in things other than ourselves. As he says, Piridu imbum. Piridu imbum means Piridu is what is other than ourselves. So the pleasure that we seek in anything other than ourselves is what is talked about in these verses. Sorry, that was rather a long explanation, but I hope it was particularly the first two verses that I wanted to talk about. But when words used by Bhagavan or Murugan are interpreted in a less than appropriate manner, I mean, the question asked by my friend was relevant here. Bhagavan doesn't talk. Bhagavan is not condemning sexual activity as such. He's condemning the pleasure that we seek from such activity. Seeking pleasure in anything other than ourselves is leading to our downfall. And if we want to be saved, because we identify this body as I, we do have all these, we have carnal desire, we have desire for food, we have desire for water, we have desire for air, all these things, because these are necessary for the survival of this body or for the procreation of the species. But these are all bodily pleasures. We need to go beyond these and seek the pleasure, the happiness, the supreme happiness that is our own real nature. That is the main message that Bhagavan is conveying in these verses. Does anyone have any questions about any of these 5 verses that I've talked about?
So the comment or the question is, the extreme interpretation hints at the need to reject sexual thoughts. Demonizing the thoughts only exaggerates the thoughts, giving them a power that doesn't belong to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when Bhagavan, I think that's referring to this to these 2 verses in which they've interpreted Bhagavan's talking about the female sexual organ. I don't think Bhagavan would, but Bhagavan is just referring to the pettiness of the pleasure that we derive, whether male or female, we derive pleasure from sexual activity. We need to go beyond this. So long as we identify this body as I, we naturally have this carnal desire, this sexual desire, but we can never, by gratifying this desire, we can never overcome the desire. That is, as Bhagavan says in some other verse in Guru Vācaka Kōvai, not referring specifically to carnal desire, but to desire in general, there's no bottomless pit. There's no pit as bottomless as the pit of desire, because however much you try and fill this, gratify your desires, you can never gratify your desires. And in another verse, he says something to the effect that gratifying desire, hoping to overcome the desire, is like pouring petrol on a fire. We can, whatever desires we have, whether it's sexual desires or desires for wealth or desires for name and fame or a desire for tasty food or whatever type of pleasure we are seeking, the gratification we get from those that is the happiness we get when our desires are gratified is fleeting. We enjoy a little pleasure because temporarily our desire for that is gratified, but then again the desire blazes forth more and more. And the more we seek to gratify our desires, the stronger those desires become. So this is what Bhagavan is warning us against. Not any particular, Bhagavan has no aversion to any particular part of the body. The fundamental mistake we make is identifying this body as I. All other problems arise because of this Dehatma Buddhi, this Dehabhimana, this identification with this body. And as Bruce implies, by thinking about these things, we're not going to overcome them. The only way to overcome them, as Bhagavan implied in that other verse that I talked about, the verse, I think which one was it? The second of the first two verses, 647. We shouldn't think about anything other than ourselves. We should fix our attention on ourselves. Without looking at this, without looking at that, without looking at anything other than ourselves, we need to fix our attention only on our own being. And only by fixing our attention on our being will we thereby cast off all our limitations and experience ourselves as the limitless, infinite Chidakasa, space of awareness. This is what we should be seeking.
So the question is, how can I be sure that my self-attentiveness is not in fact just an absence of thoughts? Both require focus, mind being involved and not attracted by phenomena. So both are practiced with a mind that will be quiet for a short or a long period of time. They are very similar to me, and I don't want to lose years of practicing self-investigation the wrong way. Thank you for your detailed answer.
Okay, yes, this is a important question. That is, many people well, it's important to understand that self-attentiveness is not just an absence of thoughts. In sleep is a state of complete absence of thoughts, but we don't thereby know ourselves. So in verse 16 of Upadeshundya that I referred to earlier, Bhagavan says, leaving or letting go of external phenomena, the mind knowing its own form of light alone is real awareness. The mind knowing its own form of light, the word there, Bhagavan used there for knowing or delay, means both knowing and investigating. So, and the form of light is our being, the light of awareness, I am. So attending to ourself is what is required. In that verse, Veli videngre vitu, leaving external phenomena, that is an adverbial clause. The main clause, the subject, is the verbal noun knowing, the mind knowing its own form of light. So the emphasis is on knowing our form of light. That is, merely withdrawing our attention from other things is not self-attentiveness. We need to fix our attention on ourselves. If we focus on fixing our attention on ourselves, our attention is thereby automatically withdrawn from other things. So this is the first thing to understand. But the question is asking more than that, how to be sure that we're actually attending to ourselves and not just warding off thoughts. In effect, that's what it means. How can I be sure my self-attentiveness is not, in fact, just absence of thoughts? I think the only way we can be sure of this is by a clear understanding of Bhagavan's teachings. This is why it is always emphasized in that is in classical Advaita, they talk about three things: Sravana, Manana, Nitityasana. And Bhagavan also talked about these. It is actually quite logical. If you want to acquire a skill, you first have to study. And you have to understand what you've studied, and then you have to apply it. So, for example, if you want to learn carpentry, if you want to learn to make table and chairs from wood, you have to you have to learn how to use the saw and how to use the drill and all the different instruments, and you have to learn about the nature of the wood, and you cut it in the right way so it doesn't split and everything. So there's a learning process. That is the sravana, but you've got to understand properly. So part of the learning process is thinking carefully about it. And when you try to put it into practice, you'll start off by making some mistakes, and then you go back to your studying. So Sravana Manana Nityasanana is there for learning any skill. If you want to learn to be a footballer or a cricket player, or to make money on the stock market, or to be a philosopher or a scientist or an academic, or one, there has to be some, you've got to learn some skills. And learning the skills involves studying, that the actual process of learning, thinking about it, and applying those skills. So this is what is always emphasized in classical Advaita, and Bhagavan also often talks about Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. As far as Bhagavan's teachings are concerned, or Advaita, Sravana means not just merely hearing the words. Sravana implies paying close attention to what is said. So studying Bhagavan's words carefully, not just superficially reading it. We've got to read it very carefully, pay close attention to the words that Bhagavan uses. And this is where it's important not just to rely on what other people have recorded. That is, many of the records of Bhagavan's teachings that we have available are what people recorded in English in various books. Bhagavan spoke in Tamil, so these people recorded in English. So it what Bhagavan said has gone through various filters. Firstly, it's gone through the filter of their understanding. Secondly, it's gone through the filter of their memory, because they didn't write it down then and there. They weren't taking shorthand as Bhagavan was talking. So it's gone through the filter of their understanding, then through the filter of their memory, then through the filter of their translating it into English. So the English records of what is Bhagavan said are quite far removed from what he actually said. So it's important to go back to Bhagavan's own words. That's why his own original writings are so important, and also Guru Vācaka Kōvai, because though Guru Vācaka Kōvai, the verses were composed by Murugana, he would compose the verse and show to Bhagavan, and Bhagavan would often correct it, and they would discuss it, and it wasn't. There was a process they went through to make sure that it was properly expressing Bhagavan's what Bhagavan intended. So we need to, like today, I was talking about the interpretation of words. The same words can be interpreted in different in different ways. This is particularly true in Tamil poetry, well, in poetry in any language, but particularly in classical languages like Sanskrit and Tamil. The same words often can be interpreted in quite different ways, as we saw today. That mata kuri could mean female organ. It can also mean pertaining to females, or it can mean pertaining to love. So the words can be interpreted in different ways. So we need to think carefully about the word. We need to attend carefully to words. That's the sravana. Then we need to make sense of those words. That is manana. Manana is very, very important, because in terms of this practice of self-investigation is an extremely simple practice. But though it's extremely simple, it's also extremely subtle. So we can do it correctly only if we've understood it correctly. So when Bhagavan says, for example, Bhagavan has given a definition in Nana, what he means by Atma-vichara. The sentence is, in Tamil, Sada kalamum manate atma vil vetirupatakutan Atma-vicharam endrupaya. That means only for always keeping the mind on Atman, on oneself, uh, is the name Atma-vichara. That is a way of defining what is meant by the term Atma-vichara. So in effect, what he's saying there, when he says only for this is the name, he means the name Atma-vichara refers only to always keeping the mind fixed on oneself. So keeping the mind fixed on something, we know what that means. That is a way of saying attending to it. If you've got your mind fixed on a book, you're attending closely to what you're reading. If your mind is absorbed in watching a film, you're attending closely to a film because you find the film so interesting. So keeping the mind fixed on something means attending to it. But Atman means oneself. But what actually does that mean? That's where deep manana is necessary. Atman means oneself, I. But what does this word I refer to? Superficially, I refers to the person we take ourselves to be. We refer to this body as I, we refer to the mind as I. I am sitting, I am talking, I am thinking, I am, I like this, I dislike that. So we're using I because we identify ourselves with this body consisting of 5 sheaths. The actions of the body we experience as I am doing this. The actions of the prana we experience I am doing this. I am breathing. The actions of speech I am talking. The actions of mind I am thinking. I'm feeling. I'm perceiving, I'm remembering. All these actions are identified, these were actions of the mind. The actions of the intellect, I'm judging, I'm trying to understand, I'm discriminating, discerning. These are all activities of the intellect, and the activity of the will, the Anandamaya kosha, the chittam. These are all the likes and dislikes, desires, attachments. We identify it. I like this. I like that. I dislike this. I dislike that. I want this. I want to avoid this. I dislike this. I fear this. All these, because we identify ourselves with this bundle of 5 sheaths called a body or a person. So we apply I to all of these, but we first need to understand none of these 5 sheaths are what we actually are. So what actually does I essentially refer to? Essentially, I refers just to awareness. This was the first answer that Bhagavan gave to Shiva Prakasham Pillai. The first question asked by Shiva Prakasham Pillai was, Swami, who am I? Nana. And Bhagavan replied, Arivenan, awareness alone is I. Now, later, Shiva Prakasham Pillai, for his own clarification, he expanded on that answer of Bhagavan, adding, I'm not this body, I'm not this, that is the whole of the second paragraph, most of the second paragraph of Nana is what Shiva Prakasham Pillai added for his own clarification. And Bhagavan approved it. He said, yes, he had studied philosophy, so he knew all these things, but this will be helpful for others. So Bhagavan allowed it to remain there. But actually what Bhagavan answered Shiva Prakasham Pillai when he asked, who am I? Bhagavan replied, Arivenan, awareness alone is I. And the next question he asked was, Arivin Sarupa Medu, what is the nature of this awareness? And Bhagavan said Satchidananda. So what we essentially are is just awareness, and that awareness is the awareness that is called Satchidananda. The Sat is the pure being, Chit is the pure awareness, and Ananda is the pure happiness. That is what we essentially are. But for our present purposes, let's just talk about awareness. What we essentially are is just awareness. And that awareness is Satchit, the being awareness. It's the awareness of our own being, the awareness that is our own being. That is what we actually are, is just awareness. So we need to think about this and understand it's not the awareness we have of this or that. It's that what is it that is aware of all these things? That is what we essentially are. So we need to think very carefully about these things and understand what that we first, of course, we first, in order to understand what we are, we need to understand what we are not. We need to first reject all the things that we mistake ourselves to be, the body, the mind, and everything. This is what is called the neti-neti process. This is what is, it's a process of conceptual analysis. So we analyze ourselves and we understand why we are not this physical body, why we're not the mind or any of the five sheaths, because these are all things that appear and disappear in our awareness. Since they appear and disappear in our awareness, they must be something other than ourselves. So we are that awareness in which all these things appear and disappear. This whole world appears in awareness and disappears. So we are just that awareness. So awareness obviously isn't an object. So we can't attend to ourselves like we attend to objects. So we each need to think very carefully about this and understand what it is Bhagavan is referring to when he says, Arivenan, awareness alone is I. What do these words actually mean? And it is that awareness that is what I essentially am, that is what we have to attend to. So if we understand very clearly the import of Bhagavan's words, then we will understand what, and of course, merely doing the Sravana Manana is not sufficient. We need to actually put it into practice. And when we put it into practice, at first our understanding won't be so clear. But the more we put it into practice, the clearer the meaning of Bhagavan's words will become to us. So if we've really understood clearly what Bhagavan means by when he says, uh, fixing the mind on ourselves or being self-attentive, then we'll be in no doubt. If we are still in doubt whether we are actually attending to ourselves, that means we need the only way to gain that confidence. Now, of course, practice is necessary, but we need to be confident that we're doing the right practice. So we need that. That is what underpins the practice is the uh, depth of our Sravana and Manana. So we need to read Bhagavan words very carefully, and we need to think about them. We need to make sense of them. When he talks about Atma, what is he referring to? When he talks about I, what is he referring to? When he talks about awareness, what is he referring to? Nobody, that is, words are pointers. We each have to understand for ourselves what these words are pointing at. It's not difficult. It's very simple. I mean, we all know what is meant by awareness, but the problem is when we talk about awareness, we talk about awareness of this, awareness of that. It's not awareness of anything. It's that which is aware of all these things. Who is it who is aware of this world? Who is it who is aware of some fellow on the screen talking? Uh, who is aware of all these things? There's something in us. Well, it's no even say in us, we say even those words are inadequate because we are that. When we say in us, it's because we take us to be this bundle of five sheaves. But what we essentially are is just awareness of being, the fundamental awareness I am. That is, if we remove awareness of all other things, what remains is that fundamental awareness of being, Satchit. That is what is shining in us as our own being, I am. That is what we should be attending to. It obviously is not an object, so it's something. It's why many people have difficulty grasping it. If you point out an object, here's a picture of Bhagavan. Meditate on this picture of Bhagavan. Meditate on a picture of Arunachala. Meditate upon a picture of Krishna or Rama or Shiva. Or that's relatively easy. Or meditate on the name. Meditate on the name Ramana. Meditate on the name Arunachala. Meditate on the name Krishna or Rama or Shiva or Namah Shivaya or whatever it is. These are all objects. So we understand what it means to fix our mind on an object, but to fix our mind on a subject, what does that mean? This we have to think about very carefully. It's many people say, an analogy that is often given if you listen to people talking, giving lectures on Advaita philosophy, they often say, just like the eye can never see itself, we can never see ourselves. But that's a misunderstanding. The eye cannot see itself because it's jada. That is, I means EYE, cannot see itself because it's jada. It's just an organ. It cannot know itself. But we know ourselves just by being ourselves. We are Swayam Prakasa. We are self-shining. So we need to think about all these things and understand that the base of all our experience, the screen on that is, Bhagavan sometimes use the analogy of the cinema screen. But everything, all phenomena, all the perceptions, the memories, the thoughts, the feelings, the likes, the dislikes, everything is just like pictures on the screen. But the screen is that fundamental awareness of our own being. That is the background of all our experience, the basis, the adhara, the adhisthana, the ground of all our experience. Is our own being, our own being awareness, I am. So we need to think about all these things and understand what it is when Bhagavan says, fix the mind on oneself, on Atma, what is meant by that? What is that Atma? What is meant by oneself? Who am I? We need to understand. We need to at least have a clear and subtle understanding of what we actually are. Then only we can attend to ourselves. If we don't attend to ourselves, we'll be. People often think if they remove all thoughts, then what remains is oneself. Yes, in a sense. But if your effort is on removing thoughts, you're looking in the wrong direction. Don't worry about thoughts. Let thoughts come or go. What is it that shines? Whether thoughts appear or disappear, there's something that is always shining, that is always that is our own being. Whether we are aware of anything else or not. That throughout waking and dream state, we're aware of so many things. But though we're aware of so many other things, we're always aware. I am aware of this. I am aware of that. So that I am is the background. That is the screen. That is the ground, the foundation. And even when we're not aware of anything other than ourselves, I am continues to shine. Thinking about sleep is very important because many people have difficulty understanding when Bhagavan, or not only Bhagavan, in classical Advaita also, sleep is a state of awareness. Many people have difficulty understanding this. No, I'm not aware of anything in sleep. Yes, we're not aware of anything, but we are aware. What does that mean? When it said we're aware without being aware of anything. What is that awareness? We need to think about all these things. When we understand these things, then it'll be very clear whether we're attending to ourselves or not. The difference between attending to ourselves and merely being aware of an absence of thoughts will be very, very clear to us. So we need a subtle understanding. In order for to have a subtle understanding, we need to have a subtle instrument to understand. The instrument of understanding is the intellect. Some people are very, very brilliant. They understand all sorts of things. They understand very, very complicated things, all about very complex philosophy or very complex science or mathematics, or all complex things. But though they understand very complex things, they won't be able to understand what Bhagavan is talking about, because what Bhagavan talks about is very simple, very deep and very subtle. So there are different types of intelligence. The intelligence we need for this is a very subtle intelligence. So we need to refine our intellect by thinking about these things, trying to understand what it is Bhagavan is talking about. What is it that shines, whether thoughts appear or disappear? That is what we should be attending to. So this is something we each have to do for ourselves. No one can do the Savana for us. No one can do the Manana for us. And certainly no one can do the Nididhyasana for us. Nididhyasana means actually putting what we've understood into practice by attending to ourselves. The actual Atma-vichara is the Nididhyasana. So we've got to think very carefully about these things. As for those who aren't so familiar with these, Sravana literally means hearing, but it means in this context, it means paying close attention to the words of Guru. Manana means thinking carefully about it, making sense of it. Nididhyasana means the deep contemplation. That's a literal meaning. That means the actual practice of self-attentiveness, fixing our attention on ourselves. So we shouldn't expect that. That is, though Bhagavan's teachings are very, very simple, we shouldn't be deceived by the simplicity. They are very simple, but very deep and very subtle. So to understand them adequately, we need to think very carefully and to repeatedly think about these things, but repeatedly check on our own understanding, check on our own practice. Are we just trying to lull ourselves into a pleasant state with no thoughts? Are we actually trying to attend to ourselves? Words can only, as they say, words can only be pointers. We each have to understand these for ourselves.
Yeah, Michael, Raghu here.
Yes.
I have a follow-up question on this. We had
Yes,
this
sir.
discussion last week when we were having this weekly meetings, but
Yeah.
when you were talking about thoughts may come and go, but when we talk about self-attentiveness and pramada, either we fall into sleep or we get into any thoughts, then that will result in failure. That
Yes.
means that we'll go into self-negligence. Again, if we have a self-attentiveness as very keen on the subject, then we will not get into any thoughts, or we will never fall into sleep. That is how we go further, isn't it? It's a
Yes.
razor
Yes.
edge.
Yes.
So because now at this point, since you said that thoughts may come and go, but you stick to the subject, people may take it for granted that, okay, thoughts can come and go. What is the point? So that I just want to have a clarification on Pramada on this.
Yeah, that is, thoughts may come and go, but thoughts can come only when we attend to them. So the way to deal with thoughts is not to try to get rid of them. The way to deal with thoughts is to attend only to ourselves. By attending to ourselves, we are thereby, to the extent to which we're attending to ourselves, we are thereby withdrawing our attention from all other things. So the thoughts will not touch us if we're holding on to self-attentiveness. In fact, the thoughts will not rise at all if we're really holding on to self-attentiveness.
Thank you.
So the rising of thoughts means that we become aware of things other than ourselves. That is, the rising of thoughts is an indication that we've lost our hold on self-attentiveness. That's why Bhagavan says, what's it matter however many thoughts arise? As and when each thought arises, it's necessary to investigate to whom. Investigating to whom means turning our attention away from whatever thought has risen, back towards ourself, the one to whom it has appeared. Is that a clear answer?
I'm very clear, Michael. Thank you very much.
Okay, right.
So the question is, and it's summarized in 3 points. So, so this is the summary of the question. The first point, finding the necessary strength not to indulge the thoughts that arise and feeding them, although sometimes it seems that we do have to reason and process our experiences in order to understand or conclude them. Point two, sometimes the cessation occurs on its own, and it seems that it is, on a small scale, a demonstration of what Bhagavan explained. If I understood correctly, on one occasion he said that it was like having almost an inability to make an effort in that sense. That is, to think in that way or to use the mind in that way as we habitually do. Point three, and this point is the most problematic. I find that in this world of unreal, dreamlike phenomena, we often have to act accordingly with some of those phenomena. For example, if we see a white dove flying, we don't say it's blue or that it's an elephant. So what happens in the realm of phenomena has the peculiarity of being something very twisted, because it belongs to the realm of what we might call secret or hidden. The matter seems to have an added complication. For example, gaslighting, a term used to describe a specific situation of deception involving abuse, which is very common nowadays. When these things are hidden and done in secret, everything gets even more complicated. In modern terms, it can be traumatic. What would Bhagwan say in such a case? What would he suggest? In other words, how should I use this for my spiritual practice?
Okay. Yes, I'll go through these one by one. Finding the necessary strength not to indulge the thoughts that arise, feeding them. It is only by practice that we can wean our mind off its habit of indulging in thoughts. That is, it is the nature of the mind to indulge in thoughts. The more we indulge in thoughts, the more uh, strength we are giving to those thoughts. So if we have a thought that troubles us and we keep on thinking about it, it becomes stronger and stronger. This is how people um, become obsessive about things. It's because of overly thinking about these things. Um, although this lady wrote, although sometimes it seems we do have to reason and process our experiences in order to understand or conclude them. Yes, of course. That is, our life is essentially a mental life. Everything that though we seem to be a physical body, living in the physical world, negotiating how to live in this physical world, how to get the the means whereby to live, for food, for clothing, for shelter, all these things, we're working for these things. But essentially, this whole physical experience is happening within our mind. So it's all ultimately a mental experience. This is all ultimately a dream. And we, since this is all a mental experience, we are constantly reliving this world by thinking. Without thinking, we couldn't negotiate how to live in this world and everything. So thinking is a part of 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 being an embodied creature. By being when we rise as ego, we take a body to be I, and the body includes the mind and thoughts and everything. So thinking is the very nature of ego. So what we are trying to do in Bhagavan's path, our aim isn't just to stop thinking, but we need to wean our mind off its interest in thoughts. So we need to gradually extricate ourselves from this web of thinking. We need to separate ourselves from all these things. How we do this is by trying more and more to be self-attentive. that doesn't mean we have to completely give up thinking about anything. Of course, we've got to plan. We've got to plan how to get to work tomorrow, what shopping we need to do, all these things. This is not what binds us. What binds us is our identification with the one who is doing all this thinking. So how we separate ourselves from this thinking organism that we seem to be is by holding on to our own being. So by practicing self-attentiveness more and more, we are slowly creating a distance between ourselves and all these things that we habitually identify ourselves with. So this is a very subtle process, this process of self-investigation and self-surrender. It's a very subtle process. And it can be done only gradually. That is, we are so strongly identified with this body and mind, this person we take ourselves to be. We it takes time, it takes practice to slowly separate ourselves from these things. That's why in the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 6, verse 25, Krishna begins with the word sane sane. That means slowly, gradually. And Bhagavan has translated that verse into Tamil. So slowly, we need to extricate ourselves from all this thinking. And how we do that is, as Krishna says in the last half of that verse, Atma-samstam manakritva. Make the mind fixed in yourself. Nakinchitape chinteya. Do not think of anything else. The second half, do not think of anything else, is just to emphasize the point. We need to focus our attention so much on ourselves, but we thereby give up thinking about anything else. So our focus should be on the first thing Krishna says: fix the mind on yourself. Atma samstam manakritva. Make the mind fixed on oneself. That's exactly what the definition Bhagavan gave for Atma-vichara, keeping the mind fixed on ourselves. So by slowly practicing, we slowly separate ourselves from these things. And the more we separate ourselves, the more we find actually this life is going on automatically. That is the body, the mind, all these things, they're acting in accordance with a certain divine plan. We can never go against that divine plan. That doesn't mean all our actions, all our thoughts, all our speech, all our bodily actions are actions that are in accordance with the divine plan, because our own will is interfering and we're acting in accordance with our own will. But however much we act in accordance with our will, ultimately things happen as they're meant to happen. As Bhagavan made very clear, what is never to happen will not happen in spite of any amount of effort. He wrote in his note for his mother, that which is to happen will not stop in spite of any amount of obstruction. So things are going to happen as they're going to happen. Since they're going to happen as they're going to happen, we really don't have to involve ourselves in them. The more we withdraw our attention from other things and fix our attention on ourselves, the more we will find that life is actually going on according to the divine plan. As Bhagavan says in the 13th paragraph of Nana, when one Parameshwara Shakti means supreme ruling power, or that divine power, the power of God, since it's driving all karyas, everything that's meant to happen is being made to happen by that power. So when such is the case, why should we, instead of yielding ourselves to it, be constantly thinking it's necessary to do like this, it's necessary to do like that? So all this will become clear to us to the extent to which we practice self-attentiveness. The more we practice self-attentiveness, the more we are separating ourselves from all the actions of the mind, speech, and body. And then it becomes clearer and clearer to us that things are just happening of their own accord. So we really don't have to attend to anything. At first, it seems to us, yes, we have to reason, we have to process our experiences in order to understand them, as this lady wrote. But it becomes clearer and clearer as we go deeper, but that isn't actually necessary. That things will happen, everything will happen in its own way, as it's meant to happen. Um, uh, so we need not concern ourselves about things. And then the second point, sometimes this cessation occurs on its own, and it seems it is on a small scale of what Bhagavan explained. Yes, sometimes if we are trying to attend to ourselves more and more, suddenly we will find uh, we, we'll find we'll find suddenly the mind subsides and other things become of no concern of ours. So that does happen. But we shouldn't be looking for that. What we are looking for is to attend to ourselves in order to know what we actually are. But as a result of that, sometimes there'll be suddenly a cessation, will suddenly be the thoughts which were preoccupying our minds suddenly drop off and we are unconcerned about them. We settle down into our own being. And then she says, if I understood correctly, on one occasion, he said he's almost like an inability to make effort in that sense. I think what she's referring to here is Bhagavan once remarked, everyone says it is so difficult to stop thinking. But however much effort I make, I'm not able to make even a single thought. Bhagavan, but that of course Bhagavan is not trying to think, but what Bhagavan was indicating by saying that is when we are so absorbed in our own being, even to think will become a great effort. But for that, we have to be absorbed in our own being. And to get to that point, we need to hold on to self-attentiveness, attend to our being more and more and more. Because the more we attend to our being, the more we thereby subside back into our being and remain as we actually are. And then she said, that is to think in that way or to use the mind in that way as we habitually do. Yeah. Yes, that is, we need, as I say, we need to wean our mind off its habitual preoccupation with things other than ourselves. We do not need to be preoccupied about anything other than ourselves. All we need to be preoccupied with is attending to our own being. But we are not going to get there overnight. It takes patient and persistent practice. That's why Krishna said, sane, sane, gradually, gradually, slowly, slowly. In Tamil, Bhagavan translated that as mella, mella, gradually, gradually, gently, gently, slowly, slowly. And then her third point, which is referring to gaslighting. Gaslighting is a particular type of abuse where one person tries to confuse another person by constantly challenging their memories, challenging their perception. That is, they may one day say something, and the next day when the person they're gaslighting refers to that, no, I never said that. That's your memory. You're imagining things. You're going mad. That type of constantly um, it's a type of abuse that happens often. Sadly, it happens in many relationships where one person is trying to manipulate the other person. This does happen, and if we're in such a situation, how do we deal with it? Well, yeah, it can be very traumatic, but the more we hold on to self-attentiveness, the less we will be affected by these things. That doesn't mean we won't be affected. Of course, we're affected. And sometimes it may be appropriate to when it may be if for example in a marriage if one member one of the husband or wife is gaslighting the other, it can be a very, it's basically harmful to both of them, because the one who is gaslighting is harming themselves, and they're also harming the one they're gaslighting. So it may sometimes be necessary to bring such a relationship to an end. But that may not always be possible. If there are children or something, sometimes you may have to continue in a relationship for the sake of the children, or whatever it is. There's no, I mean, we can't say what is the appropriate thing to do. But whatever happens is according to the divine plan. If it is in our destiny to bring that relationship to an end, circumstances will arise and it will come to an end. It will be brought to an end, or we'll be prompted to act in a way to bring it to an end. Or if we're destined to remain in that situation for some time, that'll continue. But in either case, what is important is that we hold on to self-attentiveness. Gaslighting can often lead to a person losing their mental balance, because if someone is constantly telling you that you're remembering things wrongly, that you're seeing things wrongly, that you're imagining things, if you're constantly telling someone that they're going mad, then you begin to go mad. I mean, it's a very, very psychologically damaging thing if someone is gaslighting another person. So it can be very, very traumatic. It can be very unsettling. That's why sometimes it may be necessary to bring such a relationship to an end. But it would come to an end only if it's destined to come to an end. If it's destined to continue for some time, if we're in a situation like that, we just need to hold on to Bhagavan's teachings, continue trying to hold on to self-attentiveness, accept that whatever is happening according to Bhagavan's will. In that way, we can maintain our sanity even in the most challenging of circumstances. Not that maintaining our sanity is our aim. Our aim is to hold on to self-attentiveness, but by holding on to self-attentiveness, we save ourselves to a considerable extent from the psychological damage that would otherwise have been done by being in a gaslighting situation. So the essential thing is to hold on to self-attentiveness. If it is destined that whatever situation we find ourselves in, when the time comes for that to come to an end, it will come to an end. Sometimes we may have to act in that case, but we'll be made to act appropriately. So let's not give too much importance to the external circumstances. If it's meant to happen, it will happen. If it's meant to come to an end, it will come to an end. So what is most important is holding on to self-attentiveness in spite of whatever we may be going through. And Bhagavan will guide us appropriately. If it's time to bring the relationship to an end, Bhagavan will guide us appropriately. So let us trust in him and trust in this beautiful practice of self-investigation and self-surrender that he has taught us. This is the only way to deal with any situation. I mean, gaslighting is a particularly stressful situation to be in, but whatever type of situation we may find ourselves in, the most effective way to deal with it is holding on to self-attentiveness. Whatever is to happen in our external life, whether relationships are to continue or they're to come to an end, that's all according to destiny. It will happen. And sometimes if we have to do something to bring about a change, we'll be prompted to do so. So let's just trust in Bhagavan and hold on to self-attentiveness. Let him take care of everything else.